chosen ones, this moment was etched into the astral margins of forbidden manuscripts. Manly P. Hall, a man praised and feared for his encyclopedic knowledge of the mysteries, once hinted that if even one being decoded the ancient mind locks placed by the initiates, a surge of uncontainable light would tear through the veil. That light is you. You were never meant to be average. You weren't born to be pacified by systems that numb the divine spark inside you. Hall didn't write about you by name, but he described your essence in symbols, an awakened mind cloaked in flesh, vibrating at the frequency of the ancients. He knew someone would come who could see the cipher in the symbolism, not just read it. Someone who could awaken the geometries embedded in forgotten scrolls and feel their meaning through the bloodstream. That someone has arrived. You. The teachings guarded by secret orders, sealed in vaults beneath cathedrals, and encoded into public works few understand, were never just metaphysical curiosities. They were warnings, not of fear, but of uncontrollable truth. Because when one like you awakens, the illusion cracks, the grid falters, the programs glitch. Hall warned of minds too powerful to be imprisoned. He called them walking vaults of light, destined to unchain frequencies others would call madness. But this isn't madness. This is memory, yours. And what activates it is not logic, but resonance. He knew that language would fail where light begins. That's why he used allegory, myth, symbol, not to confuse, but to filter. Only the awakened would decode what was always hidden in plain sight. And now, your activation begins. This isn't information. This is ignition. The chapters ahead aren't a story. They're a trigger sequence, a remembering. And through each one, you will feel what Hall feared the world was not ready for. Your mind, unchained by linear time, reconnecting to something that once shattered the darkness, something forbidden, something divine. The keepers of the old light knew that if you returned, you wouldn't ask for permission. Manly P. Hall's most celebrated work wasn't written for the masses. It was constructed like an arc of symbols, a vault wrapped in metaphor, hiding a frequency meant to stir only one kind of mind. Not the intellectual, not the academic, but the soul that remembers. Page after page, Hall wrote not just with ink, but with vibration. Behind every diagram, every reference to Hermes, Thoth, or Atlantis, there were triggers planted. Triggers that wouldn't detonate until your consciousness reawakened. And now, one by one, they're activating. You find yourself drawn to passages others skimmed over. Your body reacts before your mind interprets. Your breath shifts, your skin tingles, and thoughts that seem alien begin to feel ancestral. This is because you aren't reading. You're remembering. You're unlocking. Hall's work is no longer a book. It's becoming a mirror, reflecting the parts of you that were buried through lifetimes of spiritual amnesia. The sigils etched in stone temples, the blueprints of pyramids, and the coded allegories of fallen gods were not just historical whispers. They were signals, aimed across time, sent forward for you. It's why you've always felt like the information was incomplete, why conventional knowledge never satisfied you. You weren't looking for data, you were waiting for alignment. And now, the words of Hall and the keepers before him aren't teaching you, they're confirming you. He spoke of a soul that would awaken from the dust of ages and become the living initiation, not entering the temple, but becoming it. You don't follow the ancient rites, you embody them. Those who wrote these teachings couldn't name you, but they described the pattern, a mind that could see through the illusion, a light that couldn't be dimmed. They encrypted everything for a reason, because if the world could read it, it could be manipulated. But you don't need translation. The geometry speaks to your cells. The metaphors hum through your blood. You don't decode it with intellect, but with essence. And that's what Hall feared and revered. That one day, someone would unlock all of it from within. Not by studying, but by simply being. And now, something hidden in those pages has begun to awaken in you again. But it's only the first pulse. There's a frequency that doesn't belong to this timeline. It hums beneath thought, bypassing memory and logic, reaching into something older than your birth. You felt it, not with your hands, but in the way certain symbols pull your attention like gravity. When the mind touches forbidden light, time does not behave the same. Clocks stutter, thoughts echo, the veil thins. This is not metaphor. This is energetic reality. Your consciousness isn't bound by the linear. It was only trained to think so. Manly P. Hall knew the illusion of time was the grandest of all human deceptions. In his writings, he suggested that certain minds were immune to time's hypnotic effects, though they might not know it at first. Those minds would experience glimpses, déjà vu, sudden clarity, dreams that unfold like memories. You were conditioned to dismiss these moments, but you've reached the point where you can no longer ignore them, because your awakening isn't happening in sequence, it's happening all at once. You walk into rooms and feel things that haven't happened yet. You speak truths without knowing where they came from. Time doesn't pass around you, it bends toward you. This is the consequence of touching the forbidden light. Not forbidden because it is evil, but because it is uncontainable. It's the light behind the veil, the origin spark. The system calls it dangerous because it renders the system obsolete, and you're starting to remember how to wield it. As your mind opens wider, the walls between past and future start to dissolve. This is why you're remembering ancient wisdom you were never taught. This is why you're starting to see patterns where others see noise. Your DNA is catching signals from timelines collapsed and still forming. Light doesn't move through time. It reveals it, and you are the prism. Hall whispered of this mind, a soul encoded with stellar memory, destined to recall truths too volatile for public consciousness. Throughout history, there have been whispers, hidden behind the grandeur of temples, beneath the layers of sacred texts, among the hushed conversations of initiates cloaked in ritual silence. There existed a prophecy. Not one carved in stone or written in fire, but one preserved through oral transmission and encoded memory. They spoke of a mind. Not a prophet, not a king, but a mind so attuned to the divine spectrum that every veil could be lifted at its command. Not through effort, but through resonance. You were not born to discover these secrets. You were born as the key. The high adepts never feared destruction. They feared activation. They didn't lock away sacred knowledge because it was fragile, but because the world wasn't ready for what would happen if it reawakened all at once. and they knew someday someone would come with a mind wired for ignition, a consciousness that would not learn but reveal. You are not reading these truths. You are decoding your own reflection. The knowledge you are unlocking isn't foreign. It's yours. You left it for yourself, across incarnations, buried in symbols, guarded by geometry. Manly P. Hall hinted at this, calling attention to the initiatory path not as a destination, but as an internal technology. He described a ladder, not of status, but of remembrance. Each step upward wasn't ascension. It was reclamation. You are walking that ladder in reverse, descending into yourself, and finding entire temples of thought waiting to be reactivated. You were never meant to follow in the footsteps of sages. You were meant to complete their unfinished blueprint. The mind, capable of unlocking all, isn't defined by intelligence. It is defined by alignment. You see patterns not because you're trained to, but because you are the pattern. The ancient orders created layers of obfuscation, rituals of complexity, to hide this one truth. When the right mind arrives, the locks dissolve, not with effort, with presence. And the more you allow yourself to become who you already are, the faster the illusion shatters. The ancient texts didn't speak in riddles to confuse. They spoke in code to protect. In one of the most guarded lines ever written, a truth was hidden in plain sight. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. They weren't talking about a celestial event. They weren't even talking about a historical figure. They were talking about you, not metaphorically, literally. The initiates knew there would come a time when a singular consciousness would radiate light, not from study, but from origin. You weren't meant to find the light. You were meant to remember that you are it. Hall danced around this truth in his writings. He referenced the Christos within, the inner spark, the divine seed. But he never fully named it, not because he didn't know, but because to name it too clearly would mean inviting eyes that weren't ready to see. He trusted that one day someone would not just interpret these words, but recognize themselves in them. The light was never external. It wasn't hidden in temples or lost scrolls. It was buried in you. And now it stirs. The darkness never feared destruction. It feared recognition. Because when true light awakens, it doesn't battle darkness. It renders it irrelevant. You are starting to feel it in places beyond logic. It isn't illumination in the mind. It's ignition in the soul. You were never meant to comprehend this with thought. You were designed to embody it. And as you do, the world around you begins to reveal itself as a construct struggling to contain you. This is why the systems tremble when you're near. They don't understand what's happening, but they sense destabilization. Light bends reality, not just visually, but structurally. And when that light is alive inside a person, the program falters. You're not here to fight darkness. You're here to expose it by simply existing. The gospel wasn't just a story. It was a frequency. And now, the resonance of that line echoes in your being. Not because you learned it, because you were always the living translation of it. Manly P. Hall didn't just write to inform, he wrote to guard. He knew that truth, when placed in plain sight, becomes invisible to the uninitiated. His words were laced with layers, each sentence constructed like a key only a certain kind of consciousness could turn. Hall wasn't hiding the mysteries from the world. He was preserving them for the one who would one day remember how to see without eyes. That one wasn't a scholar or priest. It was someone whose inner architecture matched the vibrations of the hidden pages. It was always you. His books were mazes on purpose. The pages bend thought like light through a prism, not to confuse, but to awaken. There are phrases that ring louder in your mind than others can hear. Symbols that pull your gaze without explanation. You can feel when you've read something that was meant only for you. It strikes the nervous system before the brain translates it. That's not coincidence. That's memory. Hall warned of a day when such a being would return. One who wouldn't decode the mysteries, but trigger them. Symbolism was the language of protection. If power was hidden in plain words, it would be stolen. If it was wrapped in myth, it could be misinterpreted. But placed inside archetype and symbol, it would remain invisible until the right soul vibrated at the right frequency. You are not learning this information. You are harmonizing with it. The moment your eyes pass over the right passage, something ancient within you comes online, and Hall knew, once it started, it couldn't be undone. The warnings weren't about danger to you. They were about danger to the illusion. He understood that once a being fully aligned with the original light came into awareness, the veils would not tear. They would disintegrate. His writings are less teachings and more signals, each chapter a flare sent into the future, waiting for a consciousness bright enough to notice. And now that you're noticing, the signals are accelerating. Long before the empires of man rose and fell, before ink touched scrolls and names were carved into stone, there were libraries that held no books, only resonance. The Atlanteans built repositories not of language, but of frequency. Crystalline chambers encoded with maps of consciousness that could not be interpreted by logic, only felt by the soul. These archives were not meant for civilization. They were meant for one being whose return was prophesied not in speech, but in vibration. You. When the Atlantean priesthood foresaw the collapse of their age, they didn't grieve. They encoded. They hid the blueprints in the geometry of sound and structure, embedding keys within specific energy fields only a rare consciousness could unlock. You were that anomaly, a soul whose essence harmonized with frequencies thought extinct. The chambers didn't need guards. They needed resonance. And now that you are awakening, the signal has begun to pulse again. You've always felt drawn to certain shapes, symbols, places, not by curiosity, but by memory. They weren't just interesting, they were familiar. You are not searching for these libraries. You are the missing piece that completes them. The maps were not designed to lead you anywhere outside yourself. They were designed to lead you inward, into the layers of memory that stretch beyond this lifetime, into dimensions where thought becomes architecture and light becomes instruction. Manly P. Hall hinted that Atlantis didn't fall by accident. It fell by design. Because what they preserved wasn't supposed to awaken until the time distortion of Earth could no longer contain the original light. That time is no longer coming. It's already arrived. You've begun aligning with geometries that ancient minds couldn't decipher without tools you naturally carry, not devices. Frequency. Your presence alone activates the archives. and those archives are not ancient. They are alive. The Atlanteans built their legacy for you, not for the world. The codes you're starting to sense in dreams, visions, and inexplicable awareness aren't new. They're just reawakening. There are teachings lost not to time, but to vibration. Words spoken in tones only the awakened could ever truly hear. Yeshua's ministry was not only to the crowds. He spoke in layers, knowing only a few would resonate with the hidden current beneath his parables. He referred to those few as having eyes that see and ears that hear, not physical senses, but spiritual faculties. He wasn't offering salvation. He was planting a frequency that would lie dormant for centuries, waiting for a soul born with the memory to awaken it. That soul wasn't just symbolic, it was you. Many know the surface stories, the miracles, the cross, but fewer sense what was encoded behind the words. Yeshua's light wasn't just moral, it was dimensional. His presence altered space around him. Time behaved differently. People remembered truths in his presence that they didn't know they had forgotten. That phenomenon didn't die with him. It was passed on, like a seed carried through generations, looking for fertile ground. You are that ground. You're not here to worship the Christ. You're here to activate what he knew you would carry within. Manly P. Hall rarely spoke the name directly, but he alluded to a figure of divine mind who walked as a living code, one who spoke to awaken, not convert, one who left behind keys disguised as scripture, knowing a future consciousness would unlock them from the inside out. Every time you hear those words and feel chills, not of fear, but of memory, it's because your soul is responding to a voice that spoke to you before you were born. Yeshua knew this world would bury its light in gold and thrones. That's why he never built temples. He built resonance, and the echo of that resonance finds its completion in you. He whispered to the stars, knowing the signal would reach the ones scattered across time, those who wouldn't just quote him, but become the frequency he left behind, not to save others, but to reveal what was always inside. The ancient lodges of stone and compass were never about brick and mortar. They were vaults, not physical, but energetic, guarding something that could not be written plainly. Behind every ritual, every symbol etched on floors and walls, was a blueprint that didn't lead to a building, but to a being. You were not meant to join the lodge. You were meant to become what they protected, not through membership, but memory. The square and compass weren't tools of geometry. They were codes of alignment. The initiated weren't trying to build cathedrals. They were trying to reconstruct a consciousness shattered by time. They studied proportion and sacred measure, because they knew the human form could become a temple when the light was correctly aligned. The blueprint was never external. It was woven into the soul of one being whose frequency would match the master builder. That being was never meant to be found. It was meant to wake up. The steps, the degrees, the veils, they weren't stages of achievement. They were fragments of your architecture, waiting to reassemble themselves when the correct consciousness arrived. The rituals weren't meant to teach, they were meant to protect. Because if the blueprint activated in the wrong hands, it could be misused. But if it ignited in the right soul, the temple would not be constructed. It would become conscious. Hall hinted at this in metaphors. He referenced hidden rooms, the inner sanctum, the light behind the veil. he never directly revealed what the lodges feared most, that someone would one day walk the earth who was the final degree personified, one who didn't need to ascend the ladder because they were the ladder, one whose DNA would unlock what centuries of study could not. That one would not come through the lodge door, but would be the reason it was built. And now, the symbols follow you. You see them in places they were never supposed to appear. They recognize you before you understand why, because the blueprint is waking up. It doesn't ask for permission. It only aligns with truth. There is a form of light that doesn't illuminate. It restructures. It doesn't merely reveal what's hidden. It alters what's visible. This light is not allowed in laboratories or texts. It is not permitted inside systems because it cannot be observed without shifting the observer. It is not taught. It is triggered, and only by one who remembers their origin. This is why so many chase power and find illusion. They seek the forbidden light through effort, but it only bends reality for the one who is already in resonance with its source. That one is you. You've noticed it, not in miracles, but in the subtle warping of everyday experience. Things happen around you differently. Patterns fold. People speak words they didn't plan to say. You enter a space and timelines shift, not because you're trying, but because you're aligned. The forbidden light responds to consciousness that cannot be corrupted. It detects purity, not in morality, but in origin. You didn't earn this access. You returned to it. That's the difference the world was never prepared for. Manly P. Hall referred to this light in veiled language. He described the divine fire, the radiant mystery, the invisible sun. He warned that if activated in one not prepared, it could shatter the psyche. But what he left unsaid was the opposite truth. If activated in the rightful soul, it would rebuild the world around them, not with effort, but with frequency. You are beginning to see that you don't need to manipulate reality. You only need to remember the vibration that shaped it. The forbidden light bends matter, perception, emotion, even time itself. It calls back lost pieces of your soul and rearranges circumstances to match your frequency. You felt it in moments where reality glitches, where the improbable becomes undeniable, where silence becomes symphonic. The light does not answer to intellect. It flows through remembrance, and you've begun to awaken the exact tones it responds to. This is why everything feels like it's shifting, because it is, but not for everyone, only for you. The light isn't reacting to the world. There are pages missing from Manly P. Hall's great works, not because they were lost, but because they were never meant to be written. The final chapter wasn't a manuscript. It was a being. He knew there were truths that couldn't be bound by ink, thoughts that would only make sense when lived through the right soul. That soul would not be discovered in the archives. It would arrive like a living conclusion, one that completes the sentence left open for 100 years. You are not part of his writings. You are the unwritten truth his writings anticipated. Hall saw glimpses of what was coming. He warned that there were forces too vast, too alive, to ever be tamed by doctrine. Forces that would one day incarnate, not as events, but as people, not as teachers, but as frequencies. You are not the student of his work. You are the fulfillment of its silence. The codes he buried in allegory were always meant for a future being who would not just read the mystery, but radiate it. You feel it already. The texts no longer teach you, they mirror you. You scan ancient wisdom, not for answers, but for reflections of what you already carry. His volumes now feel like echoes, not sources, because you've surpassed the edge of the map. The last step of the path is not knowledge, it is becoming. And you're no longer walking toward the truth, you're walking as it. The unspoken chapters live in your decisions, your thoughts, the ripple you create simply by existing in a timeline that was never built to hold someone like you. And you feel the strain, not because you're lost, but because nothing external has a script for what you are. You're stepping outside the story now. Beyond the structure, Hall respected too much to damage with words. He left the ending blank not out of fear, but out of reverence, because the final message was never meant to be read. It was meant to awaken.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.